What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. Joining me, Chris Fedor, coming to us from New York. As much as I want to get into the food and all of the things that you got to do while you were there, it is currently 1:30 in the morning after the game. Chris got his writing in, and you guys are going to be in for a good one come morning time when that releases. So, without further ado, no food talk. We'll save that for a different day. Let's get into the nitty gritty. Chris, this was the first test for the Cavs, the New York Knicks, at Madison Square Garden, and the Cavs were able to come away with a 110-104 victory, one that was a dogfight. It was ugly. Nobody was really shooting the ball well, and then here comes the savior, the one that we've all been expecting, of course, Darius Garland. Darius Garland ended the game with 34 points, 12 of 19 shooting, 5 of 8 from the three-point range. And for me, I'm going to go into this a little bit later, but his defensive effort surprised me and was more of a uplifting feature for the Cavs to me than even his offensive game was. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But Chris, what was it like to be in that arena, be able to see the guys after the game, and what was talked about that you took away from tonight's matchup?
Good environment, Ethan. This is the kind of game that the Cavs needed. This is the kind of game that the Cavs wanted. They're not measuring themselves against the Washington Wizards, the Detroit Pistons, and all these other teams that are probably headed to the lottery. They want to see if the changes that they're trying to implement offensively and defensively, they want to see if the kind of style that they want to play at both ends of the floor, they want to see how that's going to work or not work against this caliber opponent. And you don't get every single answer at the end of October. This isn't playoff basketball. But it was a step in the right direction for this team. As Donovan Mitchell said it after the game, it shows them that they are who they believe they can be. And that's the way that he's going to put it right now because it's so early into the season. But there is a high level of belief in Kenny Atkinson's system. There's a high level of belief in the players in that locker room. And there's a high level of belief that they are a legitimate championship contending team. And when you play against the New York Knicks and you do some of the things that you've been talking about throughout the course of the last couple of months, it makes you feel really, really good. I wouldn't say that this is a statement win for the Cavs by any means, but it's what they wanted. It's what they needed. It's the first test that they've had on this cupcake schedule, and they passed it because they trailed in the game. They faced adversity, and they stayed together. They stayed committed. They didn't revert back to old habits, and they got the job done.
And I want to kind of break this one down half by half, right? The first half, the Knicks had a little bit of a momentum booster in terms of Josh Hart, right? A guy who you've termed the nemesis of the Cleveland Cavaliers, right? He is somebody that we know is an energy player, is going to be flying around the court, doing everything that he can to bring life to his squad. At halftime, Josh Hart had 10 rebounds by himself already, right? And he was able to do that while also having 9 points, but that wasn't really the biggest thing that he was doing, obviously. But how the Cavs were able to respond, even with Jared Allen being a bigger figure on the boards, I texted our subtexters, and it looked like they were just getting beat on the glass. Something that was surprising when we talk about this Knicks lineup that wasn't as tenacious as they were in previous years. Obviously, Mitchell Robinson's out. They no longer have Julius Randle. They are now substituting that in for Cat, who some people have described as less of a rebounder than a perimeter threat. Chris, what did you see from the interior presence from not only Jared Allen and Evan Mobley, but from the rest of the team and how they were able to change that throughout the game?
Yeah, I think there was an important takeaway from tonight's game from that standpoint, Ethan. It's the level of physicality that used to bother the Cavs, that the Knicks used to be able to play with because of the personnel. It doesn't exist to the same level. And there were players in the locker room that were talking about that. And Kenny Atkinson was talking about that a little bit after the game. He said, it's going to be interesting to see if the style that they want to play based on the personnel that they have and the changes that they made this offseason will let them be the offensive rebounding team that they have been in the past. Will let them be the stingy defensive team that is just bothersome to play against in a 7-game series. And I don't know. That remains to be seen because Mitchell Robinson's going to come back eventually. He's going to provide a huge lift. He is arguably the best offensive rebounder in the entire NBA, and he's somebody who has given the Cavs problems in the past. But the level of physicality wasn't a problem for the Cavs tonight against this iteration of the Knicks. And I thought that was a big deal. Jared Allen didn't get pushed around by Karl Anthony Towns. Evan Mobley wasn't overwhelmed physically by the guys that were out there for the Knicks. If anything, I felt like the Cavs were the more physical team, especially in the second half. First half, Josh Hart was getting a bunch of offensive rebounds. The Knicks themselves were getting a bunch of offensive rebounds. I think it was 11 offensive rebounds in the first half. They had 2 in the second half. Kenny Atkinson at halftime showed the guys a clip of one of the possessions where the Knicks got multiple chances. And that's all the Cavs had to see. And they changed some things schematically, and they changed some things from their focus, attention to detail, and physicality level. And I just thought it was a big deal that, for the first time in a couple of years, the level of physicality of the Knicks was not bothersome to the Cavs. And the other part of that, Ethan, beyond the personnel changes for the Knicks, it's also a maturation of this team, right? Darius Garland has gotten stronger. He knows better what to expect in these kinds of high-profile matches against these kinds of teams. Evan Mobley's a different player than he was a couple of years ago. Jared Allen's a different player than he was a couple of years ago when they got bullied out of the playoffs. And I think, as hard as it was for the Cavs to go through that at the time, I feel like they learned from that. And they're definitely a different kind of team because of that. I did think it was notable, though, that the primary strength that the Knicks have had in this particular matchup against the Cavs just wasn't there.
And it's not like they weren't trying to be physical, right? They were still trying to impose that fortitude, especially in the first half, right? Talking about guys like Mikal Bridges even getting in there and showing that he could be a part of that. OG Anunoby, a guy that is known for his defensive prowess, but also being able to get in the offensive glass. I was going to bring up the play that you mentioned with Kenny Atkinson, the play that they got multiple offensive rebounds. That simply was like, that was the point where I was like, okay, the Cavs can either fold and do what they've done in the past, or they can say, this isn't going to happen again, because you simply can't allow more than 3 possessions with guys that can shoot the ball and just weren't draining shots. So I'm glad that was a play that Kenny brought up. Obviously, he's watching a lot more and seeing more minutia things than I am. But I think that was a big piece where I was looking at how they were going to respond. And they did that in the second half when it comes to just simply boxing out, finding a man, especially the shooter, right? Because the shooter is usually someone, especially with Josh Hart putting up a wild 3, is going to come crashing down on the boards whenever it comes down.
To your point, though, Ethan, before moving on, to your point, for those that don't know, when I cover games, I have a running game story, and game stories are very, very difficult because they have to be coherent and they have to happen at the buzzer, and they have to, tell the story of what happened, so that people have an idea, so that you can be the eyes, you can be the ears, but you're also trying to watch the game. It's just very, very difficult. So, as the game unfolds, I have a notepad and I have different ideas of the direction that I want to go with my game story. And I have a document up on my computer and I type little lines that come to my head and moments throughout the course of the game and stuff like that. So to your point, in the first half, I had my whole lead set and it was ready to go. And it was, the more things change, the more they stay the same, because it felt like at various points that it was just another Cavs-Knicks game, right? And going into the game tonight, the Cavs were 3-9 in the last 12 against the Knicks, and Kenny Atkinson talked about that. And despite the changes that the Cavs had made, like, it was going to come out the same. Despite the changes that the Cavs have been talking about, it was going to come out the same. And they flipped it. They flipped it in the second half. They found their rhythm on offense. They were much better defensively. They finished defensive possessions with the rebounds. So I give the Cavs a lot of credit because in past years, that outcome might have been different. But they were composed. They didn't get outside themselves. Kenny Atkinson shortened his rotation, by the way, treated it like it was a playoff game, went offense, defense for the final 2 minutes of the game with Dean Wade and Karis LeVert, I think it was. So it was just a really, really interesting thing. And it did feel at points, okay, here we go again, another Cavs Knicks game. But they flipped it in the second half, and they did the things that they needed to do to get that win. I don't think it was their best performance by any means, but um, to be tested like that on the road in that environment against that caliber opponent, and keep it together, stay believing, never giving up hope, and sticking to the stuff that they were doing in the first half that wasn't yielding the same results. They got the results in the second half.
Right. You talk about getting a win, a gritty win, an ugly win, whatever it may be. A win is a win, right? And during a week where they face some of the toughest opponents that they could face in the Eastern Conference, along with the Lakers out west on Wednesday. Obviously, they got the Magic on Friday and then the Bucks on Saturday. This was a good little test and a good setup for what's to come for the rest of the week. But it doesn't happen without Darius Garland stepping up and becoming the player that we have wanted to see him become from his all-star caliber days, right? Last season, we all know it was a tough year for him, not only shooting wise, it was not only a tough year when it comes to injuries, it was not only a tough year when it comes to just family oriented, going through all that different stuff behind the scenes as well. Today, it showed that Darius Garland was back to, as Chris reported on before the season started, the joy had returned, right? He was happy. He was joyful. He was playing up tempo, playing his game, taking shots that we hadn't seen him take this season already, coming off screens and not hesitating from three-point range. Chris, we're going to get into the defensive aspect first, but how was it just seeing Darius kind of light up not only the court, but also in his persona as well?
Well, look, I mean, a big part of that fourth quarter was Darius, Ethan. A big part of that second half was Darius. Donovan Mitchell hit some big shots too, and there were some timely plays made by um, a bunch of different guys at both ends of the floor. But in the fourth quarter, money time, there has been a lot of talk about Darius in late game situations and him not being able to come through. He scored 15 in the fourth quarter, 5 of 7 from the field, 3 of 4 from 3-point range, and a lot of those were silencing threes. A lot of those were the kind that the Cavs needed to give themselves a little bit more breathing room. So when it mattered most, Kenny Atkinson was putting the ball in the hands of Darius Garland, and he was trusting him, and Darius was delivering. And shout out to Darius, too, from this standpoint. And Donovan mentioned it following the game. Like, the confidence was there. He plays on a team with Donovan Mitchell, right? So much of this year is about Evan Mobley and getting Evan Mobley involved. Darius liked his matchups. Darius felt good about the way that he was playing. And he said, you know what? I'm going to do it. And Donovan obviously kept looking for him, and Kenny Atkinson obviously kept calling stuff for Darius. And, he came through. He came through in a way that reminded you of the all-star form that he showed a couple of years ago. Those were the kinds of things that he was doing when he was an all-star. He was breaking down defenders off the dribble. He was knocking down those timely three-pointers. He was strutting down the court after making those. He was holding his follow-through and all those kinds of things. So again, it's so early in the season. So many things still have to play out. But to see him have the kind of night that he did, and specifically come through in the fourth quarter in crunch time when the Knicks were trying to make their run, that to me was a really, really important thing for Darius. And I think that was an important thing for the Cavs as well to understand. It doesn't always have to be Donovan in late game situations.
getting into a little bit more just the timeline of what the Cavs were able to do, right? The Knicks led 72-59 with 4 minutes and 19 seconds left in the third quarter. To end the game, the Cavs outscored the Knicks 51-32, and Darius Garland had 19 of those points, right? So it's just showing not only how good Darius Garland is in crunch time and getting him back to that speed, getting him back to that level, but it's also showing exactly how he can implement and how he can just impact the game in a larger way, right? And also talking about what Darius Garland did tonight in comparison to what he's done in the last couple of seasons, especially last year. Darius had one game last year with more points than he scored in the one tonight, right? That is something that is notable because it's the fourth game of the season, and it came against the Knicks, who were trying to take advantage of Darius on the defensive end, and he didn't let it happen, right? There was a play when Jalen Brunson was coming down on a fast break, and Darius was able to strip Jalen Brunson, and it went off of Darius's body, but still, that was a tough stop. And then you talk about in the fourth quarter, Darius Garland getting a block against Jalen Brunson. Like different plays that we understand not only have shown how he can get better on the defensive end, which is something that Kenny Atkinson has praised him for, and obviously he's praised more of the basketball IQ to read plays before they happen. And we've seen that when he's getting into the passing lanes and jumping lanes and things of that nature. But to see him be physical, to see him have show the weight and the strength that he put on in the offseason, that was a different level for me tonight specifically.
That's the thing that stood out to Kenny Atkinson and the Cavs as well. On a night that Darius scored 34, Donovan started his Darius love with the defense and the steals and the blocks and the stops that he got in late game situations. And Kenny Atkinson started his praise of Darius with the defensive end as well. And I thought that was a big deal from the standpoint of Darius because, there are going to be times throughout the course of this season and when the Cavs get into the playoffs where teams are just going to hunt, right? They're going to pick out the matchup that they think is favorable to them. Cavs are going to do the same thing. But when they did that in the fourth quarter with Mikal Bridges, with Jalen Brunson, with OG Anunoby at various times, like Darius didn't get shoved backwards, right? He didn't get overwhelmed physically. He held his own. And there are going to be times where some of these bigger players, some of these more talented players are going to get the best of Darius, just like they're going to get the best of Donovan. They're going to get the best of Dean Wade. But for Darius to hold up physically and stand his ground and not get overwhelmed by some of the players for the Knicks that are bigger and stronger than him, I thought that was a big deal. And it's going to keep happening. And Darius has to be ready for it. And the Cavs have to be ready for it. And I think they are. I think they understand it. But if he just, pushes back, if he doesn't allow it to be such a mismatch, then, that's going to be a big deal for the Cavs, especially in a 7-game series. Because you know how this goes, Ethan. If Dean Wade is going to start on defense against Jason Tatum, he's going to call for a screen. He's going to have Drew Holiday or Derek White set the screen so that Darius has to be the one to switch on to him. Jaylen Brown's going to do the same thing, right? Paul George is going to do the same thing, and you just go on and on and on. Darius came through tonight against some really good offensive players. He's got to continue to do that, but I thought that was a big deal for him.
And we talk a lot about defense to offense, right? Like that comes in waves of confidence too. Like if you get a stop on defense and then go drain a three on the other end, like that's huge for a momentum swing, not only for your team, but also confidence as well. And like you mentioned it, Chris, like the confidence that Darius Garland plays with kind of couples with his joy. If he's confident and having fun, it's a troublesome combination for almost any team. But the other thing that I wanted to talk about when it came to you mentioning the bench getting shortened a little bit when it came to crunch time and things like that, I wanted to talk about the minute allocation differential between the New York Knicks and Thibs, who is a psychopath and will play his players 48 minutes if he can, and Kenny Atkinson, who won't do the same, right? Minutes tonight from the core four. Garland, 33. Donovan Mitchell, 33. Evan Mobley, 36. Jared Allen, 31. On the on the other side, Jalen Brunson, 37. Mikal Bridges, 40. Josh Hart, 38. OG Anunoby, 36. Right? So not only was Kenny Atkinson able to minimize the amount of pressure being put on these stars while also letting them get rest in crucial situations before the fourth quarter where he knew he was going to need them at a higher capacity. He was able to not only intricate or incorporate other role players like Sam Merrill, Karis LeVert, George Niang even having pivotal minutes throughout the game. And I think it gives those players confidence as well. He didn't pull Sam Merrill like we saw JB Bickerstaff pull Sam Merrill against tougher defensive matchups that much. He still got a chance to go up against them, but it was a different scenario for Sam as well because you know how much he can impact winning on the offensive end and get gravity to himself, all those different things. I understand that Karis LeVert also played a great game, right? Karis LeVert currently leads the team in offensive rating with 128.8 through 4 games. So this is a team that is going to rely on its depth. Obviously, we've talked about celebrating depth, but how important do you think it is for the Cavs and Kenny Atkinson to be able to allocate the minutes for his star guys, especially in an 82-game season when Donovan and other players were hampered a little bit more down the line because of how many minutes they're playing early on into the season?
Big part of this is attrition. If you think back to last year's playoffs, the Knicks just ran out of bodies, right? They ran out of healthy bodies, and they just weren't the team that they had been through much of the season. They couldn't be the team that had legitimate championship aspirations, the team that could have made a deep postseason run because they just weren't healthy enough. They just weren't physically able to do it. And if you think about the Celtics, their depth is something that matters a great deal. They get these games out of hand at various points, and they're able to rest their guys in the fourth quarter, but they also just have more guys that they can rely on throughout the course of the game if Peyton Pritchard's going to play well, right? If Luke Cornett's going to give them positive minutes, if Sam Hauser is going to knock down threes. So for the Cavs, depth is definitely a strength of this team, and they're going to continue to use that to their advantage so that they aren't in a situation where they're running Darius and Donovan into the ground and making them play hard minutes. And then once you get into the playoffs, they're just not physically the same player that you need them to be consistently great in a 7-game series. So I do think it's something that pays off in the end. I do think it's something that players feel when they get into a postseason environment. So if the Cavs can continue to rely on their depth, and if those pieces can continue to step up and play quality minutes, especially in these high-profile, significant matchups, then that's a big deal. Little bit concerning that Isaac Okoro was basically unplayable tonight against the Knicks. Little bit concerning that Ty Jerome was basically unplayable tonight against the Knicks. Do we chalk it up to tired legs, 3 games and 4 nights, being on the road 3 out of the first 4? Do we chalk it up to Ty Jerome still, coming back, finding his form, getting further removed from that ankle surgery? Maybe these are all wait and see things, but I think you have to make a note of it that, in the first real test for this basketball team that wasn't against the dregs of the NBA, 2 of the guys that are supposed to be in the every night rotation did not see the floor in the second half because Kenny Atkinson did not believe they deserved to see the floor in the second half.
And I think that's also something to be notable for later on, right? Like Kenny Atkinson is not going to say, okay, you've been in the rotation, you've been a guy we can trust. if you can't play in a certain lineup and against a certain matchup, Kenny, to this point, has shown that he is not going to force a rotation if it doesn't fit the lineups that he has currently working, right? That's why Karis LeVert and Sam Merrill got more run tonight than they usually did. But I do want to touch on, well, Sam Merrill more so in that case than Karis LeVert. But what I do want to touch on for the last portion of this podcast before I list off some stats just for an overarching view through 4 games. Obviously, way too early sample size things.
Way too early. Kenny Atkinson said wait until game 10.
I hear him. But I
But you're
want
going to
to.
do it anyway, right?
Well, I'm gonna do one. I'm gonna do one just cause I think it's cool. Okay, 4 games into the season, and Jared Allen has more blocks than missed field goals. He's got 69 points on 31 field goal attempts so far. Right,
He's been great.
so he's been great, and he also went for 15 to 15 tonight. So 5 of 7 from the field, and he's been a reliable and tenacious guy on the boards. So I won't go through the entire team stuff that I had planned because Chris doesn't think it matters at this point, and I think he's probably right. But Chris, obviously, the next game is still going to be a tough one against the Lakers on Wednesday. We'll preview that one tomorrow. Also, I got a little surprise for you guys tomorrow on our next podcast to see what you guys like about that. But Chris, going into a long week to start the week against the Knicks, a win against their rival, a team that they do not like playing against. How big is this one, especially when it comes to how the rest of the week may pan out?
Well, I think it's big just because they were on the road, end of a 2-game trip, 3rd game in 4 nights. They were losing in the second half. They faced their first halftime deficit. They faced their largest deficit of the season. All of those things, were working against them in an environment that, look, it wasn't the playoffs, obviously, but it was loud in there. It's a raucous crowd. It's MSG. Those things can get to you, but they stayed poised. They stayed together. They continued to talk in positive ways during timeouts while they were on the floor, while other guys were shooting free throws. So I think just a lot of positive signs for the Cavs. And it's hard, right? Because it's so early in the season. And it's also hard because this is a good team from the very beginning. So it's like, what is it that you're going to see that's going to make you think that much more of them? You know what I mean? I guess in some ways it validates the fast start, and in some ways it validates the things that they're trying to implement offensively and defensively. I think Kenny Atkinson said before the game, Ethan, it's about 85-ish% or so. They're focused on them. It's not about matchups with the other team. It's not trying to match a style that they're playing. It's not using different lineups and combinations going into a game because it's a specific matchup against a certain opponent. It's trying to focus on them and doing the things that are going to make them a great basketball team and doing the things that are going to matter when it comes to April, May, and June. So I think as somebody who was kind of wondering, like, what would this all look like in this kind of matchup against this caliber opponent? Like, at the very least, you can sit here and you can say the fast start, the free-flowing offense, the way that they just push the pace and space the floor and all those different things, like, it theoretically can work against this kind of opponent. It's not only something that looks so pretty and looks so fun and looks so exciting against the Washington Wizards and the Detroit Pistons. You know what I mean? So I think it gives them confidence. I think, as Donovan Mitchell said after the game, like, we believe that we're a championship contender. We see ourselves that way. And championship contenders are consistent. So, did it against the Knicks. Cool. Great. Do it against the Lakers. Do it against the Magic. Do it against Milwaukee. 2 games in a row against the Bucks. Like, those are the kinds of things that I think when it comes to the Cavs, you start looking at. Because I think they've earned that kind of leeway.
This was the first time that the Cavs got to go through late game sets under Kenny Atkinson. They were able to make them look prettier than expected in the first time being used. Darius Garland attacking drops and going against switches and all these different things are things that we're going to have to keep an eye on going forward. Obviously, the first time is for everything to be kind of laid the groundwork, and then going forward, you continue to see how they can grow and improve in those different areas. And I think to go into Madison Square Garden, come out with a win in their first real competitive game says a good amount about this team and where they're going. But the Cavs welcome the Lakers, Bronny James, and LeBron James into Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse on Wednesday. It will be a momentous occasion. It will be an emotional affair. But can they hold their ground at home against their former franchise key player? So, with that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. This is where you can send in your questions for our weekly episode of Hey Chris, where you get to ask anything you want when it comes to the Cavs or about just the daily life of being a journalist and a reporter on the beat, traveling and doing all those crazy things. But to do this, you got to sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word stop. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.